Welcome to another episode of The Unseen Paranormal, where some of the scariest things are unseen. I'm your host, Eric Freeman. Hey everybody, welcome back to The Unseen Paranormal. Today we are talking to teacher and writer Elizabeth Randall. Elizabeth has authored numerous books, including Murder in St. Augustine and an Ocklawaha River Odyssey. But today we're talking to her about her book, Haunted St. Augustine and St. Johns County. Hey, Elizabeth, welcome to the show, and thanks for joining us.
Hey, Eric. Thanks for having me.
You're a teacher, you're an English writing teacher, and have been for many, many years.
Mm-hmm.
So what would make a English writing teacher want to write a paranormal book?
Well, I actually got the idea from an editor, and the original book was actually two books. It was the Haunted St. Augustine and St. Johns County, and my other book, Women in White. So I wrote a book about paranormal instances in Northeast Florida, there's paranormal history all over Florida, but a lot of it, some of the best of it seems to be in that area. At least that's my opinion. So I wrote this really long book, and then I kind of had to cut it down. History Press, is very regional, and they only wanted the St. Johns County part of it. And so I had to sell the other half to another publisher, and it came out a year or two later as Women in White. So my birthday is on Halloween. So I always, and I use that as an excuse for my interest in the paranormal. And I do have an interest in it, but the actual book itself was a suggestion from an editor.
Yeah, and like you were saying, there's so much history in Florida, being, one of the first places that was settled by the Spanish, and especially St. Augustine and St. John's. One of the reasons I was interested in talking to you about the book is because my family, we used to go down to St. Augustine for 2 weeks every year when I was a kid.
Oh, where'd you stay?
My parents had a family friend who owned a house out about 30 minutes outside of St. Augustine. And so I've been to quite a few of the places that you wrote about, and that's what piqued my interest.
Yeah, it's still a huge tourist area. I mean, I don't know that I've ever been there when it wasn't packed. One time when my husband Bob and I were doing research for this particular book, Haunted St. Augustine and St. Johns County, we went on St. Patrick's Day, and they were having a seafood festival, and I hadn't booked a room in advance. So we really had to hustle for a place to stay. And that night we wanted to see you know about the city gates, don't you?
Yes.
Okay, that lead into St. George Street, that have been there, since the 18th or 19th century, and were once part of the fort. And it's the entrance to St. George Street. So we had heard that at 3 o'clock in the morning, a little girl who died of yellow fever in the 1820s was there waving at motorists saying, "Don't come in, there's yellow fever." And so, as we discussed earlier, Bob and I are kind of ghost agnostics. We've never seen a ghost before, although we've had a few incidents that were unexplainable. And so we got up at 3 a.m. from this hotel, which was kind of a dive, and ran down the street to the city gates, hoping to see this little girl. Well, it was St. Augustine. People were still partying. We're still in the street. And we did not see the little girl. But looking back, it was one of those unexplained things, because we didn't see the little girl, but we saw 3 boys sitting on a low part of the city gate. And afterwards, I'm like, what were 3 little boys doing out there in the middle of the night?
Right.
Yeah, so that was one of those things, was it or wasn't it?
Right. Yeah, just the time of the night that little kids shouldn't be out.
Yeah.
In the book, you talk about the city gates of St. Augustine, and then you had mentioned the fort, and that's Castillo De San Marcos. There was also Fort Marion at one point.
Right.
It's been around for hundreds of years, and it's changed hands between the Spanish and the British, and back to the Spanish. But that was Ponce de Leon discovered that area, and there's lots of stuff about Ponce de Leon, and supposedly the Fountain of Youth is in St. Augustine as well. I've actually drank the sulfur water from the Fountain of Youth. And, there's a
Fountain of Youth. It is. St. Augustine is such a great place, but it is a tourist town. I mean, when I moved to Florida in the 70s, we would go to St. Augustine. And then I talk about this in the introduction too. It was the oldest city and everything was the oldest. And then it flipped and now everything is haunted. And, some things really probably are. And, I documented them at great length. But, in any type of tourist town, there's going to be some hype.
Right. Well, and now especially with all the ghost shows and the ghost tourism that happens, they kind of got to capitalize off that, I guess. And then you got all the ghost tours and that type stuff. And when I was going down there as a kid, I don't remember any ghost stuff at all. It was all just tourist stuff. Yeah, going to the fort, the Castillo De San Marcos. And then I was amazed years later when the TV show Ghost Hunters first came on. They went there.
Yeah.
And it was kind of neat, having gone there quite a few times as a kid and actually being a place where the TV show that they thought it interesting enough.
Yeah. For Florida natives, they're like, oh yeah, there's the fort. But when you first see the fort, it looks like a medieval fortress. I mean, it's really strange and spooky looking. And there's all kinds of, haunted stories about it. Some of the people in St. Augustine, they don't like to talk about the haunted side of it. They deny that there are ghosts and they think it's just a lot of baloney. But there's a lot of stories about the Castillo De San Marcos. Like you put your ear to the coquina wall and you'll hear gunfire and cannons. And Chief Osceola was kept there for a while before he was transferred to South Carolina. And they say you can see his suffering face on the west side of the wall. And then, doing my research, I found out some really interesting things that lent credence to the haunted side of it. And that was in the 1830s, I think. I don't remember the exact date. It was probably in the 19th century. They found all these skeletons and bodies in a back room. And there was also something like a hole that led to quicksand where they would drop dead bodies rather than bury them and then cover it. There's a little porthole cover. So there's all kinds of strange things that went on there. And because it's so old, the history is unbelievable. But every 4th of July, they have a big celebration on the grass there. And they let the fireworks off and the cannons from the fort. And of course the cannon goes off every day at a certain time too.
Yeah. And for the listeners who've never seen the fort, it like you were saying, it's a massive structure. It's like 30-foot walls. And it's a type of coral rock that they built it out of.
Coquina, yeah.
Yeah, and it has a moat around it. And I think they closed it off because they were getting sharks caught in there, like baby sharks would come in. But I know when I was a kid and we went there, the tide would come in and it was connected to the ocean because the fort is right on the water.
Right.
And the moat would fill up, and they ended up shutting the moat off from the ocean because they would get baby sharks to come in, and they would get too big and couldn't go back out.
Yeah, they also cut it off because it was ruining the foundation of the fort, the salt water.
It's probably the closest thing to like a medieval castle-looking structure that we have in the United States as far as just the way it looks and the way it's built. On each corner, it has like this turret with these gun ports in it. Yeah, it's a pretty amazing place to go to.
Yeah, and the inside is, what is it? It's a square, I think. And each corner is named for a different saint. And, there's a lot of interesting things about the fort. And they do a very good job. They have reenactments there and all kinds of stuff. So it's a great tourist spot. And it's a national monument.
Yeah, and one of the famous ghost stories from there is a headless soldier that carries a lantern, I believe, that walks along one of the tops of the walls. Yeah,
he's looking for a ring or something. He dropped a ring and he's looking for it and he doesn't have his head, so he can't find it. And so I don't know about that. But there is another story there that is probably more likely. Apparently, during one of the occupations, a Spanish soldier's wife took up with another soldier, and he walled them into one of the rooms downstairs, and somebody found them. There's, years later, their skeletons fell out, and you could still smell the perfume of the woman who was walled up with her lover.
Wow, that's pretty crazy. That if that's true, that you can still smell the perfume after that many years.
Well, that is supposedly one of the indicators of a ghost is, odor.
Yeah.
So who knows?
Yeah, there's lots of reports of that in different locations, especially one of the biggest ones is tobacco.
Yeah.
The smell of like cigars, and then perfume being the other one.
And also sweat, I've heard,
Yeah.
Or the smell of fear maybe is the same thing.
Yeah, and when the Ghost Hunters TV show was there, of course they put cameras all around, and they actually it looks like a person walking along the wall, like a faint silhouette of a person walking along the wall. Yeah, it might lend a little credence to the soldier looking for his head in the ring.
Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't know that. I just thought, that was one of the commercial stories.
Yeah, the video is pretty interesting. You can probably find that clip on YouTube, I'm sure.
Yeah, I'll take a look.
But there's some other stories that you put in the book that aren't necessarily ghost stories, but they're still interesting, like legends.
Mm-hmm.
One of them that I found fascinating was the Love Tree Cafe.
Oh gosh,
and
yeah.
Whether it's true or not, the tree that's there is pretty amazing.
It is.
And so for all the listeners, the Love Tree Cafe, they have this cafe around this tree, but this tree is a palm tree and an oak tree that have grown together.
Mm-hmm.
The palm tree is kind of growing out of the oak tree. So what's the story behind that?
And again, I don't know if this is true, but it could be. Apparently there were two lovers and they couldn't be together, so they were buried. The place where the love tree is used to be part of the Tolomato Cemetery. And that's pretty much true for everything in St. Augustine. The roads, there's bodies buried everywhere. And, the confines of there's three major cemeteries right in town. And the confines of the cemeteries, hardly cover it. But the Love Tree Cafe used to be part of the Tolomato Cemetery. So, that would account for a bit of the spookiness. So they were buried and couldn't be together in life, but in death, the palm tree is supposed to be the woman and the oak tree is supposed to be the man who supposedly protects her. And it really is an awesome sight. And of course, the legend is if you kiss someone under the love tree, you'll be with them forever. But they caution you to be very careful who you kiss because you may not want to be with them forever. And they're like, don't kiss your kids or you'll under the tree or you'll never get them out of the house. So, but that's the legend. And my husband and I, we kissed under the tree and we're still together after 22 years. So who knows?
Another interesting haunted building. And in St. Augustine, St. Augustine's kind of like some other cities, like Charleston. I've been to Charleston, South Carolina. And
I love Charleston. Yeah,
I do too. And they're very similar in that everything is old. Like if you go to a certain part of town, everything is old. The buildings are repurposed, and one of the interesting stories in St. Augustine is the Ripley's Believe It or Not Museum being haunted.
Yeah, and again, that's one of the haunted stories that, it appears there could be, some truth to it. The really interesting thing to me, though, as an English teacher, is that Marjorie Kinnan Rawlings owned it. It started out as a huge house for an oil magnate. I think his name was Walden. And he and his family of 13 children lived there. And then after the Depression, of course, he left. A lot of buildings in St. Augustine were abandoned after the Depression, fancy buildings. And so he left, and it was vacant for years. And it was really kind of a spot for homeless ruffians. There were people staying there who robbed and stole, and some people were killed. And so they were going to tear it down. But Marjorie Kinnan Rawlings said, no, I want to buy it. And she bought it and, transformed it into this swanky hotel, the Hotel Walden, I think she called it. And then one of her friends who was married to someone who was, abusing her physically, Marjorie said, no, stay at my hotel. You'll be safe there. And then there was a fire on the second and third floor, and her friend and another woman perished from smoke inhalation. They were found in the bathtubs. And so ever since then, people say they see the ghost of these women, peering out one of the windows. And some of the people who work there that I talked to said there were some funny things that, that happened around the place where the fire occurred. people smelled smoke sometimes, or they felt like they were being pushed, or they saw a woman, looking out of a window. That one is pretty interesting. Of course, I love Ripley's. How can you not love Ripley's?
Yeah, I just think it's fitting that Ripley's they put their museum in a notoriously haunted location.
Yes, they did. It makes it even better.
And then another interesting story in the book is Murder on Marine Street.
Oh God, yes. That led to a whole nother book.
That just happened back in the 1970s.
Yeah, 1974, I think it was. Athalia Ponsel Lindsay. I was outraged when I learned this story, and that's one reason I wrote the book, because she was a woman in her 50s, very ambitious, very smart, very accomplished. She lived in New York for years as a Powers model. She was a game show host. She was in a Broadway play. She had a real estate license. She invented a household gadget. I mean, she was kind of an awesome lady. And then on top of all that, she moved back home to take care of her mother, who was also a very accomplished woman, but was an invalid by that time. And she took care of her for many years in this house on Marine Street. It was actually her mother's house and her inheritance. And then she was killed on her front porch, practically beheaded in broad daylight. And after she died, everyone was, you look at the newspaper headlines, there are things like, obnoxious victim had no shortage of people who wanted to kill her or something like that. They just crucified her. And the guy who was accused of killing her, Alan Stanford, his church took up a collection for his defense. And so I'm not going to, give away what happened, but it's technically an unsolved murder. But, you read the book, I did a lot of research. And anyway, for Haunted St. Augustine, I wrote a little bit about it. And then afterwards, when I was promoting the book and doing book talk in St. Augustine, all they wanted to talk about was the murder on Marine Street, because a lot of people were there, lived there when it happened. And it was a huge thing. And it's still a huge thing in St. Augustine. And, everyone has an opinion about it. I gave a book talk once, and a lot of people came who knew Athalia or knew people involved or knew the families. And it's just very interesting. And the house is still there.
Yeah, and I love that story because I'm a huge true crime geek too, on top of paranormal, and so that's why I kind of centered on that story, because that's something that's just happened in modern history. A lot of the stories with St. Augustine and in the book, they're all it's all old history because the town's so old, but that's something that is recent.
People are still very interested in that murder, and then one of her neighbors was killed like 8 months later.
Wow.
Very just murdered on Marine Street, and it's just like, what was going on? So it's very interesting.
And probably the most notorious haunting that a lot of people probably know from a bunch of the ghost shows is the St. Augustine Lighthouse.
That's a horrible, tragic story. I shouldn't be laughing, but the ghost tours are kind of fun.
Yeah.
So I had a good time on the Dark of the Moon ghost tour. They take you out to the lighthouse in the dark. Thank God no one's ever hurt themselves. And just kind of wander around the grounds and, tell you the story of the lighthouse. Actually, the lighthouse, that was the second lighthouse for St. Augustine. The first one was washed away because it was too close to the shore. So they hired this guy to build a new lighthouse. And he did this all over the country. And he brought his 5 kids. And, no one was watching them. In those days, kids were more on their own. And the workmen for the lighthouse had like a cart from the lighthouse to the shore where they would put supplies in and take it up because, coquina and that kind of thing. And so the kids, being kids, 5 of them piled into the cart, rowed it down to the shore, and the thing flipped over and trapped them underneath. Well, 2 kids were saved, but the other 3 died. And then ever since then, people in the neighborhood and people at the lighthouse have said that they would see the girls, the kids. I think it was 2 girls and a boy, and they would, see them playing, and that the kids were very mischievous. During the Dark of the Moon tour, they're like, oh, when, we had to sit down for some story. And they're like, be careful when you get up because the ghosts like to tie your shoelaces together and watch you fall over. And, and they had the EVPs there and all that. So, but one thing I thought was a little strange was people would bring their kids to this. And I remember, it was dark. And I remember one little girl was very scared and just clinging to her mother. But I didn't find it very scary at all. I thought it was kind of cute and entertaining. Of course, the lighthouse is awesome.
Yeah.
So it's beautiful.
Yeah, it is. And it's like 219 steps to the top.
Mm-hmm.
Quite a few of the ghost shows have actually caught some interesting evidence there.
Yeah, those stories have been around for a really long time. And so, there could be, a lot of credence to them. I mean, there's been a lot of ghost sightings of the little girls at the lighthouse.
And then the lighthouse keeper's house is also supposedly a paranormal hotspot as well.
Right. I'd forgotten about that. It's right there. You can see the lighthouse from the city of St. Augustine, though. It's very pretty, especially at night.
Yeah. And there's the whole town is beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
And the old cobblestone streets and all that, I just love. It's just a beautiful place. And it just has, I've always been fascinated with it since we started going there when I was a kid, because it just has this energy about it. Just the town itself, especially when you go over to the old part, just has this, I don't know, it's just this palpable, weird energy to it. And you can almost feel the history of it in a way, I guess, because it's so old.
That is so true. And my husband and I, say, we, after writing this book, we thought, oh, we're experts on St. Augustine. And then every time a friend of ours would go, they would tell us something we'd never heard before or seen before. So it's like every time you go to St. Augustine, there, you're going to find something different that you may not have seen before.
Yeah.
There's so much. And of course, it was the site of the civil rights movement. Martin Luther King Jr. came in the 60s, and a lot of people credit St. Augustine with the passage of the Civil Rights Act.
Yeah, there was a lot of sit-ins and stuff that gained national attention when a lot of the other cities weren't.
Yes,
yeah.
And the Hotel Monica, which I talk about in the book, used to be the municipal civil hall, and they used to keep dogs in the lobby to go after the civil rights integrationists. And so, there's a lot of history.
And earlier, you said that you had to split the book into 2, and you did another paranormal book called Women in White, The Haunting of Northeast Florida. And women in white phenomena is kind of all over the world. I've heard stories. I mean, you can hear stories from England and Ireland and from castles and really old places, and then all over the United States as well. I've seen quite a few. There's even a local legend that's kind of a mashup I've talked about called the White Bluff Screamer here in Middle Tennessee. And women in white is kind of a pervasive thing throughout the paranormal culture.
It's all over the world.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're going to find women in white ghosts all over the world. Now, in America, they attribute it to the fact, well, first of all, my Woman in White book is often mistaken for the one by Wilkie Collins, so that might have been an unfortunate title. But in the South, they say, well, it makes sense there's women in white because before air conditioning, which was a huge innovation in Florida, believe me, women would wear, white filmy clothes in the summer to stay cool. And a lot of them would die in childbirth or from dengue fever or something like that. So they kind of attribute that to the women in white phenomenon. But it's really, you want to look up ghost stories anywhere in the world, you're going to find it. You're right. I'm trying to think. In the St. Augustine book, there was one woman in white, or more than one. There's a nurse in white who stalks around the Spanish hospital on Aviles Street. And also in my book, Women in White, there's a lot of them all over.
Yeah, and a weird thing about that phenomena, too, is that there's 2 places that they appear the most.
Yeah.
Either on staircases or in mirrors.
That's so true.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what I've heard too.
Yeah.
There was a place in Jacksonville Beach called the Homestead Restaurant that was owned by this lady, Althea. She was always appearing in mirrors years after she died. And then there was another place, Ginger's Bar, and they used to see her walking around, going into the kitchen in white, well, walking right through the door. So,
So, in between the two books and all the research and all the stories that you heard, what's the weirdest story do you think that you heard, whether it's in the book or not?
well, I can think of two, and one was, weirder to me from a historical perspective, and the other one was just scary. The one I liked from the historical perspective was the Tolomato Cemetery. There's a little grave there of Jamie Morgan. He was only 5 years old when he died. They think he fell out of a tree or something and broke his neck. And people say they see him in, one of the trees. And there's always this feeling that he's lonely. And so doing my research, I'm like, why is the poor little kid, all alone in that cemetery? They stopped burying people there in 1884, but, still, why did that happen? And then doing my research, I found the graves of two of his siblings in the La Leche cemetery across town a little ways. And they were a brother and a sister. They died when they were 7 and 3. And the parents, I don't know what happened to them. They aren't buried near any of their children, but what a tragedy. They lost 3 of their children. And then I thought, Jamie, maybe, he's lonely and his siblings are elsewhere. Who knows? They were born after he died, though. But I just thought that was really weird. And then the scariest thing I've heard has to do with Flagler College. I've heard this story from several people who went to school there. And they say there's a lot of ghosts in Flagler College. There's Henry Flagler. He's supposed to stalk through the walls. There's Henry Flagler's mistress on the 5th floor who hung herself because he ditched her. And the 5th floor was mysteriously closed off for like 5 years at Flagler College, and no one really will say why. They said they were renovating, but that was a long time to renovate. But the ghost that most people talk about is the ghost of a little boy who lives in one of the girls' dorms, and he messes with the girls. A bartender in Jacksonville Beach told me his girlfriend went to school there, and she woke up and the insides of her thighs were all black and blue. And someone told her, well, that's the little boy. He likes to pinch.
Wow.
And then I met a bartender at Harry's place in St. Augustine, and she went to school there, and she said that one night she was alone, her roommate was out, and she's lying there, and this voice starts saying, come play with me, and it won't stop. And then she felt this pressure on her chest, and it's like someone was sitting on it. And she was just like so scared. She was scared and crying and didn't know what to do. And then the next day they said, oh yeah, that's the little boy ghost. He was playing on the rotunda and his ball went over and he went after it, and he's been here ever since. So to me, that was really scary, particularly since my daughter was accepted to Flagler College. And I'm like, I don't know about that dorm. And she ended up going to University of West Florida. And even though that college is gorgeous and there's so much history there, ghostly and otherwise. In fact, I stayed there for a week on a seminar I went to. The Tiffany glass in the lunchroom is worth millions of dollars. It's just a beautiful, beautiful place. But it probably is haunted. I mean, I've heard so many stories about it, and I really didn't want her to be traumatized.
Yeah, that is pretty scary, especially any spirit that people have claimed has touched them or hit them or pinched them, or there's stories about spirits trying to push people downstairs and stuff like that. Yeah, that tends to be a little scarier if they can do something to you.
Oh, it's Scarlett O'Hara's in St. Augustine. There's supposed to be the spirit of this guy who drowned in his bathtub. And they say he haunts the 2nd floor. And a policeman said he got shoved almost down the stairs by this guy.
Wow.
Of course, who knows? But that's the story. And the bathtub, they used to display it. And then they have a portrait of the guy who supposedly is haunting the place. And there's like a crack that widens across his face. And it's fun. But he supposedly shoves. So
coming from a police officer, it's a little more credible, I think.
I think so too. Yeah, he's not going to, be swept away by some paranormal fairy tale.
So everybody can find your books on Amazon and on Barnes & Noble's website. All you got to do is search author Elizabeth Randall, and you come right up with all of your different books. Mm-hmm. You have anything in the works?
Well, Aqua River Odyssey came out a year ago last August. And the Florida, I just wanted to mention that, the royalties for that one, half of it go to the Florida Defenders of the Environment to save the river. And so if you're environmentally minded and you like to see some great photography and hear about the river, that would be a good book to look at. But there's no ghosts in it, none whatsoever. I wrote a fiction book that I'm polishing off, and I'm interested. I live near Casadega. Have you ever heard of Casadega?
I have not.
Oh, you should look it up, Eric, because this is a spiritualist community in a tiny little enclave in Volusia County. It was founded in the 19th century by a guy named George Colby, who said he was led there by an Indian spirit guide. And it's a tourist spot. Everyone goes there to talk to dead relatives or get their palm read or tarot cards read. About 100 people live there, and a few of them are descendants of the original spiritualists settling, but they're really into the spiritual side of things. They hold meetings where they give messages, and it's a really interesting place. Plus, they have a haunted hotel that has a great restaurant. So it's about a half hour from where I live, and I'm thinking of writing a proposal to write a book about that maybe next year.
Awesome. Well, it's been great talking to you. I thank you for coming on today.
Okay. Well, great talking to you, Eric, and I love your podcast, and talk to you another time.
Thank you so much. And thank you, everybody, for listening. And as always, stay safe out there. Have a good day. Join us next time for a new episode of The Unseen Paranormal. Until then, check us out on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or at our website, unseenparanormalpodcast.com. And don't forget to like, review, rate, and share with all your friends. Thank you to my friend Chris Lips for the awesome theme music. Listen to our theme song and more of his music at chrislipsmusic.com. And remember, some of the scariest things are unseen.